Welcome back. After watching the last video, I hope you've been able to identify some of your traditional habits and tools and have questioned how they're still serving you. Maybe you've even found that some of them are worth letting go. In this work, we may need to challenge even our most basic assumptions. A great example of that for us to discuss today is to challenge the idea of what failure means. Oftentimes in our culture, it's taken for granted that failure is bad. I think a lot of this starts when so much of our actions get based on the idea that we have to avoid pain, which of course is just another assumption. We'll come back to that in another video. But then oftentimes, since we associate failure with pain, we can only conclude then that failure must be bad. And just like pain, it needs to be absolutely avoided. Now, you may never have overtly thought of this, but nevertheless, you might find that this is actually how you are living your life, at least to a degree. And what a shame that is. That's a huge limitation we place on ourselves with that contract that we tell ourselves that failure is bad. Today, I'd like to explore how we can improve our concept of failure. And I'd like to start with a great historical example of apparent failures. One of my favorites is Thomas Edison. Now he, as you may know, tested over 1,000 different filaments before getting a workable light bulb, bringing us into this new era with the one that finally succeeded. Now you could call those first 999 tries failures. And you might have imagined you were an investor or a family member. What would you have really thought about all those failed attempts? 999 of them. This is looking pretty bleak. And of course, history could have easily turned out differently. Edison was not alone. Others were trying just as hard to create a workable light bulb at the same time. If they had done it first, would he in fact be a failure? Or what about them? Since they didn't get there first, are they in fact failures? Well, it's always easier to judge in retrospect, but really, put yourself in his shoes or his family's shoes. How would it have felt? Pretty bad. What's the difference now? Perspective. So, if you've been having your share of failures, particularly in the area of mental health, I understand how discouraging that is. Let's try to change that. Let's get perspective. Number one, most people I know of that have accomplished great things in their lives will tell you that they've learned more from their failures than their successes. So, indeed, a lot of times if it hadn't been for their failures, they may have never reached the places they are now. One of the ways we can make sense of that is to understand that if I try something and I simply succeed, that's nice, especially in the short term. But all I've done then is practice what I already know. There's little, if any, growth in that. But when I don't succeed, I typically learn something about the experience, I hope, and then perhaps change something as a result. That sounds a lot like growth to me, and I hope it does to you too. So as painful as it can be, our lack of success leads to more growth than our success does. This is often true in our lives in general, and certainly true in our personal journeys with our own mental health. Tough times are extremely painful, but they also tend to be what propels our growth forward. Just consider in your own life, where have you done the most growth? In good times or in bad? The pain of that can make it very difficult to admit, but it is often true. So this doesn't mean that we actively seek out pain and failure, but let's change our perspective on those failures in tougher times and be sure that we learn and grow from them. As long as we're learning and growing, perhaps like Thomas Edison, then it's much harder to call it a failure, at least in that traditional sense of the word. And besides, if we're afraid of failure, if we're afraid to risk, believe me, we're sabotaging our own chances for growth, and ironically, sadly, we're sabotaging our own success. So, don't let fear limit you. Live fearlessly. Remember again, you've got a perfect soul. Success and failure in the world's eyes can never change that. It's unconditional. Find that path to making your own light bulb turn on and shine brightly onto the world. Give all this some thought. Try to examine your fears around failure and consider your perspective. As always, share, comment, and let's talk.